Welcome to BattaBox. I want to tell you a story about a region of Nigeria, the region that is most neglected but has produced the most amount of leaders. That region also has the highest voting bloc in the country. You might ask yourself, why is Northern Nigeria neglected? Why are we even talking about Northern Nigeria if Northern Nigeria has produced the most amount of leaders compared to other regions of the country? Well, it's a long story. Take a back seat and get ready for a very bumpy ride. Let's go. BattaBox. This is the untold story of the neglected Almajiri and terrorism in Nigeria. In a region where breathtaking landscape meet vast deposits of natural resources, it seems almost unthinkable that Northern Nigeria would be synonymous with poverty. Unfortunately, that is the case, as the North is home to nearly 90% of Nigeria's poorest citizens, making it one of the most economically disadvantaged areas in the country. Despite the terrible hands they were dealt, Northerners are known for resilience, hospitality, and an amazing culture. In Nigeria, the North's legacy of leadership is undeniable. It has produced the highest number of presidents and military leaders in the nation's history. When you're talking about uniting Nigeria and keeping Nigeria as one, the North has always produced leaders that had that mindset. For example, Gowon. Despite uniting Nigeria during the Civil War, Gowon is one of the best military presidents that led the country through a very difficult time while uniting all of Nigeria. 10 of the 16 leaders who have directed Nigeria's affairs, including the country's first and only prime minister, all hail from this region. Plus, Northern Nigeria is blessed with fertile land and valuable minerals like tin, barite, zinc, tantalum, limestone, lead, and many more. However, despite these political accomplishments and national endowments, Northern Nigeria is still trapped with extreme poverty. Why? It is a paradox that while the rest of the country thrives in economic and relatively environmental advancements, Northern Nigeria still continues to be plagued by stagnation and extreme poverty. This raises the question, with its rich history and leadership, why does this region continue to lag behind? The untold story lies in a complex web of neglect and enduring Almajiri system and the shadow of terrorism. As was demonstrated during the 10-day End Bad Government's protest, Northern Nigeria was seen to be the one most impacted by the poverty in the country. The cancerous hand of illiteracy in Northern Nigeria. Illiteracy in Northern Nigeria is a major factor in the region's ongoing poverty and stagnation. Just like building a future without the foundation is impossible, billions in the North are doomed to a future of continued poverty. First, let's talk about the state of education in the North. In many parts, schools are underfunded, understaffed, and simply don't even exist. For millions of children, especially girls, the classroom is a distant dream. Instead of learning to read and write, they are trapped with the misguided notion that education is a waste of time. The few who do make it to school often receive subpar instruction, get taught with outdated materials, and are not exposed to adequate facility. Without basic education, people struggle to access opportunity that could lift them out of poverty. They are cut off from jobs requiring minimal literacy skills, leaving them to rely on low-paying, unskilled labor. That's if they even find work at all. The rampant illiteracy in Northern Nigeria directly impacts people's standard of living. When the majority of people can't read or write, they can't access necessary information about health, hygiene, and nutrition.
The recent statistics of out-of-school children in Nigeria shows that about 8 states, mostly in the northwest region of the country, contribute half of the number. This is one of the steps the United Nations Children's Fund is taking to reduce the number of out-of-school children in the country to the barest minimum.
It has been highlighted that part of this problem is on poverty, migration, religion, culture, and all these things.
They are less likely to understand the importance of family planning, for example, vaccinations, or hygiene, or even basic sanitation practices. Plus, cultural restrictions on women working or the stigma of women starting businesses also contributes to the region's abject poverty. Consequently, the lack of knowledge leads to poor health outcomes that affect economic growth, since a society filled with sick people is unlikely to be productive. High birth rates. The high birth rate in northern Nigeria is like a ticking time bomb that continues to add relentless pressure to an already overstrained system. Let me paint a picture to make the current situation clearer. In northern Nigeria today, it is not just common, it is almost expected for a man to have multiple wives and a brood of children. And when you have many mouths to feed in an area with very limited resources, there's going to be a problem. Food, healthcare, and education will become luxuries that only a very few can afford. The children from these massive families often find themselves stuck in a cycle of poverty, lacking the education to escape the grim reality they are born into. They get stuck in a generational trap. Today, northern Nigeria reports the highest under 5 mortality rates compared to the other areas of the country. Why? It all stems mostly from illiteracy. Children die more in northern Nigeria under 5 years old than any other part of the country. In contrast, families in southern Nigeria are smaller sized. Although the tradition in this region also favors large families, southerners have a different mindset, one that prioritizes a higher quality of life to the quantity of children that a man can breed. Parents understand the importance of investing in each child's education and well-being, and with fewer mouths to feed, the result obviously is a better standard of living. Since you made it this far, please like this video and subscribe for more insights into the issues shaping Nigeria and other parts of the world. Now, let's continue. The begging culture of the Almajiri. Another contributor to poverty in northern Nigeria is the normalization of begging for alms. In the north, many families depend on one wealthy member for support. While community support is valuable, I get that, this reliance can stifle individual ambition, and when done on a large scale, it can even affect economic growth. Under the Almajiri system, parents send their children to distant lands to get educated in Quranic ways. This system dates back to the pre-Corona era. It was initially designed for children to receive Islamic education under the guidance of a religious teacher or malam, often far from their homes.
A suicide bombing kills and injures dozens of people at a busy market in northeastern Nigeria. The attacker is a 12-year-old boy, a pupil of an Islamic school network known as Almajiri. Forced to beg by day and study by night, Almajiri children are trapped in poverty, vulnerable to abuse and exploitation.
If you can feed them, you can give them money to spend. Whatever you ask them to do, they will do it. These Boko Haram people, almost 80% of them are Almajiris because they need assistance. So it's easy for one to convince them. If you can feed them, you can give them money to spend. Whatever you ask them to do, they will do it.
This is Umar's school. No desks, no books, no walls, no roof. Just a simple clearing shaded by a tree. But when night falls, the air is charged with religious fervor, and the voices of hundreds of children reciting the Quran from wooden balls called Allu. The children are taught to learn the Quran by heart, but they are also taught to fear. If they stop reciting, even for a moment, retribution is swift and violent. Men with whips stand ready to punish the slightest transgression, lashing out indiscriminately. It goes on like this throughout the night in the heat of the fire, until the mouths of the children burn with thirst.
These boys are learning to memorize the Quran here at a traditional Islamic school called a Sangaya. They were sent here by their parents who live far away. And as part of the tradition, they are required to beg for food.
In recent years, Adamawa has become a battleground, one of 3 states where Islamic militants Boko Haram are waging a campaign of terror, including this suicide bombing of Yola's marketplace in June 2015. 32 people were killed and many injured. Police say a boy aged just 12 walked into the crowds of shoppers and blew himself up. A common sight in Yola and across northern Nigeria, children of Africa's biggest economy living from hand to mouth. The boy at the gate cries out. He who sacrifices himself for God will be rewarded later. Allah is one, Almajiri is begging. This is Umar Saleh. Like the boy who carried out the deadly attack on Yola's marketplace, Umar is 12 years old. He also goes to an Almajiri school. Widespread across northern Nigeria, Almajiri schools teach children the Quran and to support themselves by taking to the streets day after day to beg for money and food.
Begging is luck. Sometimes you get food immediately when you go out. Sometimes you don't.
Thousands of Quranic students are on the streets begging every day in Maiduguri, the Borno state capital. For decades, the Almajiris have been a normal part of life here, but these days, more people see them as a nuisance. Cultural historian Bulama Maligubio says the practice has gotten out of hand.
Young kids, the age of 5, 6, 7, have been dropped in Maiduguri here in their thousands. They have no parents, no teacher, no guardian, nobody to take care of them.
Activists estimate there are more than 5 million Almajiris in Nigeria. Usman Mohammed was an Almajiri many years ago. These days, he's trying to reform the system.
If they are begging, some people will beat them, harass them, abuse them, all kind of insult. They have been experiencing all kind of humiliation.
Usman goes around the city to find Almajiris. One teacher, Umar Mohammed, has more than 100 students under his care. He says that forcing children to beg is un-Islamic but necessary.
This tradition has been around since our grandparents, so you can't just wake up and condemn it.